They thought I'd just leave quietly. They had no clue what I'd built behind the scenes. My name's Mark Ellison. I'm 48 years old, and until this morning, I was the lead systems guy at Axis Corps. For 15 years, I built their backbone, the data pipelines, the compliance logic, the whole $620 million platform they're hyping for next week's global rollout. That system was my blood and bones. Late nights, endless coffee, debugging until sunrise. All of it led to that platform. And now I was sitting in the boardroom I practically lived in, watching a circus unfold. Kayla Vance walked in like she owned the place. 27 years old, all confidence and sharp angles, with her perfect hair and the kind of grin that told you she'd never been told no in her life. She didn't sit down. She didn't even acknowledge me with a nod. She just leaned on the table, laser pointer in hand, and started her little speech like this was some motivational TED Talk. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, pausing for effect. "This is a new era for Axis Corps. We are not dragging dead weight into the future. We're done with old school thinking and dinosaur delays." Dinosaur? That one stung. I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my eyes on the table. It was easier than watching her play the room. Then she turned, eyes locking on me with a smirk. "This isn't 2010, Mark. We don't do dinosaur delays anymore." A few people laughed, nervous, forced laughs. I caught Raymond Cruz, our CTO, shifting uncomfortably in his chair, but he didn't say a word. Nobody did. Kayla thrived on that silence. She straightened her blazer like she was about to deliver the punchline. "As of this morning, Mark Ellison will no longer be leading our systems division. We've decided it's time for new blood. I'll be taking over directly, effective immediately." My heart thudded in my chest. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat felt like it was full of concrete. 15 years, and this was how they cut me loose? With some over-rehearsed line from someone who barely understood the difference between an API call and a cron job, Kayla snapped her fingers at the HR rep in the corner, some kid I'd seen twice before. He stood, holding a folder. "Please hand over your badge and any company property, Mark," the kid said, reading from a printed script. "Your access credentials have been revoked." I looked around the table. No thanks, no handshake, just a bunch of executives staring at their laptops like I'd turned invisible. I slid my badge across the table. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice even. "Wouldn't want to slow down the new era." Kayla smiled, all teeth. "Good luck, Mark. Enjoy. Whatever's next." I stood, grabbed my bag, and walked out without another word. But inside, I was boiling. They thought they could just erase me. They had no idea what they'd done. Because here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just the guy who designed their system. I was the only one who knew which version was real. And the one they're about to roll out, that one's just the shell I left behind. I went back to my desk, the one I'd carved grooves into from years of leaning on my elbows during late-night coding marathons. I powered on my terminal, typed my credentials, and hit enter. Access denied. I tried again, same result. I checked my email, logged out, my GitHub repo, wiped from my access list. Admin console, gone. Even my company-issued laptop went dark, like it knew I was already a ghost. It all happened in under 60 seconds. 15 years of my work, my documentation, my notes, scrubbed like I'd never existed. I could almost picture the IT department getting Kayla's order and gleefully pulling the plug, one login at a time. I glanced around the floor. The open office buzz was the same as always, but I felt the shift. People I'd mentored, stayed late with, shared pizza and bad coffee with, none of them looked at me. They were glued to their screens, pretending not to notice me, packing up my life into a battered canvas bag. Not cruel, just scared. That's what Axis Corps did to people. One wrong move and you vanished. The only one who met my eyes was Mia. She was the new intern, barely 22, still learning how to navigate the maze I'd built. I'd been showing her the ropes, little tricks buried deep in the system, things you only learn after years in the trenches. Her face flushed when our eyes met. She looked like she wanted to say something, maybe, "I'm sorry," but her lips stayed shut. I gave her a small nod. It wasn't her fight. I slid my personal items into the bag. My old ceramic coffee mug, a couple of notebooks, a tangle of cables. At the bottom, wrapped in a soft cloth, was a matte black USB drive labeled in silver marker. Layer 0. That drive was my insurance policy. My real system, the version that actually worked. The one with the logic I'd built to handle global traffic without collapsing. The one they didn't even know existed. I created it quietly over the years. A fully separate codebase that mirrored their platform, but with a mind of its own. If they ever betrayed me, it would be mine alone. I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked out. My badge buzzed red at the elevator, already disabled. Figures. I waited for someone else to swipe in and stepped through without a word. They think they can launch without me. Let them try. The system they're about to roll out, it's just a hollow shell, a decoy I left behind. By 10:30 a.m., Axis Core had turned my work into a circus. I sat on my couch with a chipped mug of stale coffee, watching Kayla Vance's live stream on my laptop. She was standing in the lab I used to run, now covered with LED strips and branded merch, like a cheap tech influencer setup. A ring light reflected in her eyes as she grinned into the camera. "Welcome to the future of Axis Core," she announced, waving her arms like a magician about to pull a rabbit from a hat. No legacy code, no clutter, just sleek, modern engineering. Legacy code, clutter. That was her way of spitting on 15 years of my work while standing on the infrastructure I built from scratch. I sipped my coffee and shook my head. If only she knew that under her shiny banners was a ticking time bomb disguised as a system. Behind Kayla stood a row of interns, Mia included. They were holding boxes of free company swag, posing awkwardly for photos. Mia's smile looked forced, the kind you give when you know you can't leave but wish you were anywhere else. She glanced at the camera once, and for half a second I thought I saw her look straight through the screen. Maybe wondering where I was, maybe silently apologizing. Kayla kept talking. "We're breaking barriers with this platform. This is what true innovation looks like." She gestured at a wall of monitors, streaming metrics and code that I could read like the back of my hand. I caught my own design patterns in those scripts. She was bragging about efficiency algorithms that I personally wrote during a blizzard 3 years ago, sleeping under my desk while the city shut down. The chat feed scrolled with comments. "Wow, impressive. Zero legacy code is bold. Kayla's a genius." I snorted into my coffee. They had no idea. Then it happened. Someone, probably one of the nervous engineers scrambling behind the scenes, accidentally pushed the official build log online. It was only live for a few seconds, but long enough for me to grab a screenshot. I opened it, scrolling past the timestamps, the compiled data sets, until I saw it, deep in the metadata, untouched, unaltered. Origin, Ellison M. My name, plain as day. I leaned back on the couch, a slow grin creeping onto my face. No amount of corporate spin could erase that. Kayla could put on a show, but she was dancing on a stage I built, and the foundation still had my signature burned into it. Somewhere in that building, I imagined Raymond Cruz, the CTO, noticing the same thing. Raymond was a quiet man, the kind who never wasted words but always noticed details. If anyone would catch that fingerprint, it was him, and if he did, he'd start asking questions. Questions Kayla wasn't prepared to answer. I closed the live stream window. Let them celebrate. The real show hadn't even started yet. At 9:06 a.m., the exact second they fired me, the first trigger flipped inside Layer 0. I'd built it as a failsafe years ago, buried so deep in the system that not even a forensic audit would find it. 6 minutes later, the decoy build, the one they were so proud of, began to quietly fall apart. Not a crash, not something obvious, just slow, creeping failures. API calls taking an extra second to return, balancing queues starting to misfire, like a heart skipping beats but still pretending to pump. By 11:45 a.m., I had a clear view of the fallout from my apartment. My private monitoring script, a tool I'd left hidden inside their cloud, lit up with alerts. Singapore's servers were timing out. Melbourne's endpoints were stuttering. Berlin's data feed had started dropping packets altogether. And Kayla, she was probably still smiling for the cameras, thinking everything was under control. I leaned back in my chair, watching the red warnings roll in. They didn't know what was happening, because I'd designed it that way. The decoy system was a skeleton, a showpiece built for demos, not real-world traffic. The moment it tried to handle genuine load, it would rot from the inside out. I could almost picture Raymond Cruz in the control room. He'd be the first to notice something wasn't right. He was meticulous, too smart to miss a sudden spike in latency. I imagined him rushing to open the override console, only to hit a wall. The old admin keys were dead. Kayla had streamlined everything to make the system look cleaner, cutting out the fail-safes she didn't even understand. Meanwhile, my real system, the one on the matte black USB drive labeled Layer 0, sat untouched in my bag, fully functional, battle-tested, ready to run with a single voice command. They had tossed me aside without realizing I held the only real solution in my hands. I refreshed my monitor feed and saw the cascade accelerate. The moment Berlin's node dropped, it triggered a ripple across their global load balancer. Frankfurt started to choke next. Sydney wasn't far behind. All of it looked like random technical glitches to anyone who didn't understand the architecture. But I did. Every misfire was a breadcrumb pointing straight to me. By noon, the panic would hit. Clients would start calling, investors would demand answers, and Kayla would realize that her bright, shiny rollout was nothing more than a pretty facade. One built on my code, my logic, and my quiet, calculated trap. I stood, stretched my back, and poured myself another cup of stale coffee. The real work hadn't even started yet. The only system capable of saving Axis Core was sitting on my desk, waiting for me to decide if they were worth saving at all. By 12:15 p.m., the news ticker started flashing red alerts. Axis Core global launch falters, stock down 12%. I sat at my kitchen table with a bowl of soup I couldn't bring myself to eat, watching the dashboard I'd built turn into a live train wreck. Every node failure, every timeout, every red warning light. It was like watching someone try to sail across the ocean with a cardboard hull. On my second monitor, I had the live feed from an external status tracker. Singapore had gone dark. Melbourne was sputtering. Frankfurt's cluster looked like it was drowning. Kayla's smiling face from the morning stream replayed in my head, and I almost laughed. She wanted zero legacy code, she got zero stability instead. I minimized the feed and saw an old email pop up in a cached folder. One from my mother. She'd sent it years ago, right before her heart surgery. "Proud of you, son. I'll be watching." I stared at that line longer than I expected, my throat tightening. I missed her surgery for this company. Sat in that same boardroom, debugging issues for a launch they ended up delaying anyway. She never made it out of the hospital, and now Axis Core wanted me to feel guilty for letting them sink? I set the bowl of soup aside and opened my laptop. My hands hovered over the keyboard, the USB drive labeled Layer 0 sitting next to it like a loaded weapon. One phone call, one voice command. I could flip the switch and have everything running again within an hour. But why would I? They erased me like I never mattered. Kayla's voice echoed in my head. Dinosaur delays. 15 years reduced to a punchline. I leaned back in my chair and let the thought settle. I owed them nothing. By 1:30 p.m., Frankfurt was completely offline. Tokyo followed within minutes. I watched the map bleed red as the network collapsed under its own weight. Clients were panicking on social media. Investors were asking questions they didn't want answered, and still, I didn't move. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. Anger fades. This was something colder, sharper. I was waiting for the moment when the same executives who laughed at me this morning would start looking for the guy they thought was disposable. Waiting for someone to finally say, "We need Mark Ellison." The breaking news banner scrolled across my screen again. Axis Core shares plunge amid launch crisis. I felt no satisfaction, only a strange, heavy calm. This was inevitable. They built their empire on my foundation, but they never bothered to ask who really owned the ground it stood on. Somewhere in their glass tower, I imagined Raymond Cruz, the only one with enough brains to see the pattern, realizing exactly what had happened. Maybe he was already telling them what they didn't want to hear. That I was the architect, the one man who could stop this free fall. I closed my laptop and stood, staring out the window as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. I wasn't going back, not yet. Let them drown a little longer. At exactly 2 p.m., an emergency meeting blew up on the 15th floor of Axis Core. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be. The corporate gossip feeds were buzzing within minutes, and my private monitoring tool gave me the rest. Investors were panicking. Millions of dollars were evaporating as the stock dropped in real time. 13%, then 15%. By the time I refreshed the ticker, it was down another 2 points. Inside that glass-walled conference room, they wanted blood. "Where's the architect?" one of the lead investors barked, his voice carrying down the hallway in a leaked audio clip. "Who built this disaster?" Kayla looked pale, her phone glued to her hand like a shield. She'd been so smug this morning, but now she was scrolling furiously, trying to PR spin a meltdown that couldn't be hidden. The live status boards were glowing red. Every second, more client complaints poured in from Tokyo, Berlin, and New York. Raymond Cruz, the CTO, finally stood up. I could picture him adjusting his tie, that quiet, deliberate way he always did, when he was about to drop a truth no one wanted to hear. "The system isn't stable," he said. "And the only person who knows how to fix this is Mark Ellison." The room went silent. I smiled faintly at my screen. There it was. My name, finally acknowledged after a morning of being treated like a relic. They were starting to realize that firing me wasn't just a mistake. It was a death sentence for the company. From my apartment, I watched the numbers tank. 15%. 17. Kayla's fake confidence was cracking. She whispered something to HR, probably trying to figure out how to pin this on me. Good luck with that. Then Raymond did something unexpected. He pulled out a printed contract, one I remember drafting with their legal team over a year ago. Back then, I'd insisted on a clause they thought was harmless. 7.4, core infrastructure ownership. If Access Core removed me without transferring rights, the foundational code automatically reverted to me. I'd written it in careful legalese, tucked between compliance bullet points they never bothered to read. Raymond pointed to the clause. "Legally," he said, "the core architecture isn't ours anymore, it's Ellison's." The investor room erupted. I could almost hear the shouting through the static of the leaked audio. Kayla slammed her hand on the table. "He can't do that," she hissed. But I could, and I did. I leaned back in my chair, watching their panic spread like fire. They weren't just fighting a technical failure now. They were fighting a legal one too. Everything they thought they owned, every bragging point from Kayla's launch party, all of it was slipping through their fingers. And I hadn't even touched the real system yet. By 3:30 p.m., Access Core's legal team received a document they didn't expect. A cease and desist order from Ellison Systems LLC. That name meant nothing to them at first. But it was mine. I had registered the shell company 2 years ago, using my mother's maiden name, specifically for a day like this. The letter was precise, airtight, and brutal. Clause 7.4 of their own contract, the one they had all signed without reading, confirmed what Raymond had told the board earlier. If I was removed without a formal rights transfer, the intellectual property, the real system, reverted to me. I imagined the confusion in that boardroom when the lawyers read the line out loud. Kayla must have lost it, because a few minutes later, a grainy hallway clip hit my inbox from someone on the inside. She was storming out of the meeting room, shouting, "He can't just steal our code!" A man's voice, maybe Raymond's, cut through the chaos. "We signed this. He's got us boxed in." They tried to fight it. I knew they would. Access Core's legal counsel shot back emails, phone calls, even a vague threat of criminal charges. But Sigma wasn't theirs to control. The decoy shell might still be hanging on by a thread, but the real platform, Layer 0, wasn't even on their servers. It sat quietly on my matte black USB drive, locked with a biometric key they could never fake. Every time they attempted a workaround, my remote monitor flagged it and rejected the attempt. By 3:45 p.m., the panic escalated. I saw error logs from their network attempts pile up. They had no master access anymore. I'd revoked it all weeks before they even thought about firing me. The system they had in production was now technically and legally a dead end. And I wasn't lifting a finger. Then, just when I thought the day couldn't get better, someone leaked a video. I opened the file and almost laughed out loud. It was Kayla during a prep session for the launch demo, looking straight at the camera. "Cut the redundancy checks. No one needs to know. We'll fix it later." Her tone was sharp, impatient. She was more worried about how the platform looked on camera than whether it was safe to run in the real world. I didn't need to release the video myself. It spread on its own. By 3:55 p.m., it had hit an internal Slack channel at Axis Core. By 3:58 p.m., it was on Reddit. By 4 p.m., it was everywhere. Kayla's power play was crumbling, and she knew it. The failsafe I built into Layer Zero wasn't just technical, it was strategic. Every move they made without me dug them deeper into a hole. Axis Core wasn't just facing a systems crash anymore, they were facing a total collapse, legal, technical, and now public. And for the first time all day, I felt something like satisfaction. Not rage, just a quiet certainty that the empire they built on my back was finally cracking under the weight of its own arrogance. By 5 p.m., Kayla's face was all over the news, and not for the reasons she'd planned. The leaked video had gone viral, with her voice clipped and looped into headlines. Cut the redundancy checks. No one needs to know. Every major tech outlet was calling it what it was, negligence dressed up as innovation. Within an hour, she was done. The CEO, too. Both were escorted out of the Axis Core building by security, their shiny badges deactivated, their stunned faces caught in blurry cell phone videos that would live on Twitter forever. Kayla's perfect smile was gone, replaced by a look I knew all too well. The realization that the game was over, and there was no way to spin the truth. The board didn't even argue. The investors were calling for heads, and Kayla's was the easiest to hand over. I imagined her trying to explain herself, that she only wanted the platform to look clean for the demo, that she didn't mean for the global rollout to implode. But the video was clear, and so were the failures stacking up by the minute. Raymond Cruz, the one steady hand in the chaos, stepped up as interim CEO. He wasn't smiling. He looked exhausted in the press photo that surfaced later, but his quote said it all. "We have to face the consequences of ignoring the architect." Back at my apartment, I watched all of this unfold while sitting on my couch, my inbox lighting up like a slot machine. Desperate emails from Axis Core executives, from PR reps, even from people I hadn't spoken to in years. "Mark, can we talk? Mark, we need your expertise. Mark, please, we're prepared to make this right." I didn't answer any of them, not yet. Mia sent me a short message from her personal account. "I'm sorry about everything. They're asking if we can bring you back." That one made me pause. She was young, but she'd seen enough in the last 24 hours to understand how the game was played. I typed a reply, but then deleted it. She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this, and I wasn't ready to say what I was thinking. They weren't just losing me. They were losing the foundation I'd built. Every hour without my system was costing them millions, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the man chained to the server room. I felt free. By 5:45 p.m., Axis Core's statement went live. "We acknowledge leadership failures during our global rollout and are actively seeking solutions to restore stability." Translation: "We're begging for Mark Ellison to save us." But I wasn't going back. I closed my laptop and picked up the black USB drive from my desk. While they scrambled, I started sketching out something new, my own future. It was time to build something they couldn't touch. A month later, I found myself standing on a small stage in San Jose, not in front of investors or board members, but in a room full of engineers. There was no dramatic lighting, no glossy launch video, no loud music, just me, a single screen, and Sigma 2.0 humming quietly in the background, running flawlessly on live traffic I'd rerouted from a handful of willing beta clients. I cleared my throat. "Systems don't fail," I said, letting the words settle over the audience. "People do. They fail when they cut corners, when they let ego outweigh integrity. I built Sigma 2.0 because I was tired of seeing what happens when those values get lost." The room was quiet, but not in the way Axis Core's boardroom used to be. This silence felt genuine, the kind of attention you only get from people who actually care about the craft, not the headlines. I walked them through the architecture, showing how Sigma 2.0 scaled globally with near zero latency. No one clapped until the end, but when they did, it was real. No one was faking anything here. Axis Core, meanwhile, was still trying to recover. They had gone silent for weeks, their PR team burying story after story about the failed launch. Their stock hadn't bounced back. Investors were pulling out. I'd heard through the grapevine that Raymond was fighting to rebuild from scratch, but without my code, it was like trying to patch a sinking ship with duct tape. I got another call from them last week. I didn't answer. The voicemail was polite, careful. "Mark, we'd like to talk. There's a way we can make this work for both of us." I deleted it without listening to the rest. They had their chance. Instead, I focused on my own platform. I had spun Ellison Systems out of my apartment, starting with nothing but that black USB drive and a stubborn need to prove that I could build something better than what I left behind. And I did. In just a month, Sigma 2.0 had picked up traction with 3 mid-sized tech firms who'd seen what Access Core's failure cost them and wanted something built by someone who cared. I looked around the small summit hall, recognizing a few faces. People I'd met at conferences years ago, back when I was just another quiet engineer buried under corporate deadlines. They came up to me afterward, shaking my hand, asking thoughtful questions, not about PR strategies or profits, but about the code, the work, the vision. That meant more to me than all the corporate buzzwords Kayla could ever spout. I wasn't coming back. That much was clear. I wasn't the disposable legacy guy anymore. I was finally building on my own terms. As I packed up my laptop, someone asked, "So, what's next for Ellison Systems?" I smiled, a slow, quiet smile that felt different than any grin I'd worn in years. "Whatever I want," I said, and I meant it. After the summit wrapped up, a young developer with messy hair and nervous eyes approached me. He looked like I used to when I first started, hands shoved into his hoodie pocket, holding back words he wasn't sure he should say. "Didn't think guys like you ever win," he said with a half smile. I tilted my head. "Guys like me?" "You know," he said, "the quiet ones, the ones who build everything but don't make the noise. It's always the flashy people who get the credit, people like Kayla." I laughed softly, not unkindly. "We don't have to win loud," I told him. "We just have to outlast the noise." He nodded, and I saw something click behind his eyes. Maybe hope, maybe understanding. He shook my hand before heading off to join his friends, leaving me standing there with a strange feeling of closure settling in my chest. I packed up my laptop and walked out of the summit hall. The California evening air was warm, tinted gold by the setting sun. For the first time in years, I felt free of Access Core. They had erased me like I never mattered, but my work, the real work, had survived. Not just survived, it had become something better. I thought about all the late nights I'd spent in that glass tower, eating stale pizza while writing code that nobody would ever read or understand. I thought about the boardroom where Kayla laughed at me, calling me old school, as if building things that worked was outdated. They could keep their hashtags and their marketing buzzwords. I had something better. In my pocket, the black USB drive was no longer a weapon or a safety net. It was a reminder, my name, my mother's legacy, and every lesson I'd learned over decades of doing the work were etched into Sigma 2.0's code. This time, nobody could take that from me. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed with another unknown number. I didn't even bother to check. Access Core could keep calling, but I was done answering. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone else. It's building something they can't touch, something that outlasts them. I slipped the USB drive into my jacket and started the engine, the road ahead open and quiet. For once, I wasn't looking back.